This is very important. I want to take you through this first exercise because you need to know how to do this in order to draw the room. If we jump straight into drawing the room and you're just getting started with 3D form and perspective, it's probably going to be pretty hard. Let's understand what one point perspective is and how to use the one point perspective grid before actually trying to draw a room. It doesn't have to be perfect, okay? But just pick a spot, just make a little point. This point right here that we just created is going to be our vanishing point. The vanishing point is always going to be on the horizon line. So take your ruler, place it as horizontal as possible on your page. And in order to place it horizontally, what I like doing is always guiding myself with the top edge of my page and the bottom edge of my page. But of course, if you wanted to really measure it out and be super perfect because you're maybe afraid that your horizon line is going to be crooked, you can always just measure things. If my height of my page here is 9 inches, then you can just go on the 4.5 inch mark. Of course, I would have to bring down the vanishing point a bit and then go to the opposite side, measure 4.5, create a line, and then you would make it super perfectly right on the center of the page. As I said, your vanishing point doesn't have to be right on the center. It can be a little bit lower, it can be a little bit higher, but if you really wanted your horizon line to be super straight and you wanted to measure things out, you can always measure things out with a ruler. Take your time, do it if you have to. At this point, I think that my ability to get things relatively straight are pretty good. So I can just go like this, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be relatively straight, okay? But do whatever you have to do. Just get your horizon line on your page and make sure that your vanishing point is on the horizon line. Whether you're doing 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, your vanishing points are always going to be on the horizon line. We're going to start creating converging lines that are crossing at the vanishing point, converging at the vanishing point. Do this as slowly as you need to, but make sure that all of your lines are converging at the vanishing point. And there is no specific number of lines that you need to add. You don't want to start creating wobbly lines because this is ultimately like a grid that we're going to be drawing on. By the way, once you start understanding perspective and 3D form, you're not going to have to draw these grids anymore. Thing is that starting out with these grid exercises is going to allow you to understand form and perspective more. If you don't ever practice with grids, it's going to be very hard for you to tell mistakes and be able to do this freehand. So again, the vanishing point is the point in the farthest away distance that you can still barely see. And when you're seeing like a painting of a landscape where it's a huge open space or even a cityscape or something like that, this is the farthest away point where you can still see teeny tiny little specks of color. That point in the farthest away distance where you can still barely see a little teeny tiny glimpse of what is there. What happens with perspective is that things that are closer to you are larger and things that are farthest away from you are smaller. As things recede from you, they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. These larger sections in the outer limits or edges of this grid are already going to help you create elements that are larger, and these smaller sections nearest the vanishing point, which are smaller, are going to help you create smaller elements as everything recedes away from you and toward the farthest away distance. So this is what I'm talking about when it comes to creating those optical illusions on a flat two-dimensional surface, like a piece of paper. I try to keep the grid relatively light with my lines. Switch on over to a softer pencil grade, 4B, a 6B, whatever it is fine. This is just an exercise. What we're going to do is we're going to use this grid to draw 3D forms, draw cubes or rectangular prisms. Let's focus on planes with flat sides. Whenever it is that you're trying to develop your drawing skills, make sure that you're always visualizing everything as a simple form or a combination of simple forms. It can be simplified as one simple form, but other times it's a compound object that is made up of multiple forms. So this box is a rectangular prism. If I were going to add this box into a still life arrangement, I need to know how to draw a rectangular prism from different angles and perspectives in order to effectively draw this box. If I were to draw this box like this, all you see is a rectangle. If I start flipping this box and moving it around, all of a sudden you see different planes of the box. One plane, two planes, sometimes you see an upper plane or a lower plane. This is just a rectangular prism. But if you start seeing it at different perspectives, you need to know how to draw rectangular prisms if you want to draw this correctly. How are the planes all of a sudden receding away from you? This can definitely be simplified as a rectangular prism, and that's it. But of course it has this little element here, and it has the little handle at the top. If I were to add in this element and this element, then I could see this as a compound form, a compound structure, because this is a form, this is a form, and the box itself is a form. But the bulk of this is just a rectangular prism. Remember those three things that I always say in all of my drawing tutorials is draw lightly in the beginning so that you can continue erasing and refining as you go. Go from general towards specifics, and always simplify what you're seeing as simple shapes or forms or combinations of simple shapes and forms. We are going to be drawing a rectangle or a square. Okay, so I'm just going to pick this upper left quadrant right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a square or a rectangle, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Just draw a flat square or rectangle. You can support yourself with a ruler and use it to draw those horizontals and verticals to make up your square or rectangle. If you still don't have those drawing skills, there is no shame in using a ruler. Your square does not have to be exactly where mine is. If you want, just make sure that it's somewhere in this upper left quadrant. So once you have your square or rectangle there, observe the closest corners to the vanishing point, which in this case are these three corners right there, right? We have 1, 2, and 3 that are closest to the vanishing point. Using a ruler, align the corner to the vanishing point. And what you're going to do is you're going to pull a line. You can make it as long or as short as you'd like. If you make it longer, it's going to look like it has more depth to it. And if you create a shorter line, it's going to look like a form that doesn't have as much depth to it. It's shorter. So I'm going to do the same thing with my other two corners right here. I'm going to align my ruler to that corner of my shape and to the vanishing point. Don't rush it, and make sure that you're aligning this well and that you're touching the vanishing point that you created and you're touching the corner of your shape. And then you can pull that line somewhere close to this one that you've already created. Don't make it super long or super short, because you're going to have to close those planes with a horizontal line. So you want to have it somewhere near the length of the previous one that you created. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with this top corner over here. Take your time to align your ruler properly. Don't do it too quick. And pull that line out to a point where I feel I'll be able to close this with a vertical. And that is how you create the two planes that are receding away from you and toward the vanishing point. Let me darken these lines a little bit more. And what's very important here, once you start creating these forms, is that wherever you need a vertical, it has to be a vertical. Wherever you need a horizontal, it has to be a horizontal. We know what we need to create in terms of the diagonal or slanted lines because we have the vanishing point there to align our ruler with. But when it comes to this, and when it comes to this, the horizontals and the verticals, you need to be very careful because those need to be straight verticals and straight horizontals if you don't want your form to look wonky. I see this edge of my paper, the closest edges of my paper, I always try to see as I'm drawing that line because that will help guide you and make sure that your verticals are straight and make sure that your horizontals are straight. And the more you develop your drawing skills, the more you're going to be able to get those straight lines in freehand without necessarily even using a ruler. The longer lines are harder to get straight. You're ultimately trying to create a 90-degree angle in all these if you want this to look like a cube or a rectangular prism. You can't have crooked lines, and sometimes that can throw off the sense of perspective. To close these two planes, all you need to do is create another vertical parallel to this one and another horizontal which is going to be parallel to this one and this one. And your form has been created. Parallel lines are straight lines that would never ever cross. If parallel lines were to go off into infinity, they would never cross. So if I were to create a line that goes like this, that would eventually cross with this line farther down. They would eventually cross. That's not a parallel line. When it comes to this specific form, we're able to see three planes of this form. Carol is asking a great question. Do you use this grid process for cylinders as well? You definitely can, and in my opinion, should when you start to draw cylinders, Carol. What's important to know about cylinders is that it's very helpful to visualize the cylinder as being inside of a box. Once you understand how things get smaller and smaller and you're able to visualize the receding planes, it's a lot easier for you to visualize a cylinder being inside of this box. So all a cylinder would be, there's a flat front to it, which is a circle. For cylinders, they would fit inside of a square because it's a perfect circle. So it would fit inside of a perfect square. If the cylinder were smushed, so imagine all I can think of right now, is a roll of toilet paper. If you squish it, it would be kind of an oval cylinder, right? But it's still a cylinder. That kind of form, which would be something like that, it's kind of an oval cylinder. When it comes to actual cylinders, like imagine a metal cylindrical structure that doesn't squish and it's a perfect circle, it would fit inside of a perfect square. A perfect circle is always going to touch 4 points in a perfect square. And whenever I am drawing or painting something like a scene, whether it's a nature scene or an urban scene, or even an indoor scene, I always like visualizing the horizon line. The horizon line is our eye level as the viewer of the scene. Where your head is, that is where the horizon line is. And the horizon line is what divides the ground from the sky or the ocean from the sky in seascapes. It's very important to understand where your eye level is because that goes hand in hand with perspective and your vantage point as the viewer of the scene. To do a long front face or plane, I'm using my ruler now because these are longer lines. That's perfectly okay. And I'm adding it now into the lower right quadrant of my grid. Okay, so there's my rectangle. This is the front plane, what is going to be the front plane. Right now it's just a flat shape because it doesn't have any other sides to it. Take your closest corners to the vanishing point. And then what you're going to do is do the same thing that you did before. You align your ruler with the corner of your shape and the vanishing point and pull a line up. Give it as much depth as you'd like or as little depth as you'd like. Same thing with the others. Align and pull your line out. Align and pull your line out. And then from there, you need to close these planes. And how do you close them? With a horizontal line that is parallel to this one, and a vertical that is parallel to this one and this one. So now you have your three planes. You have your side plane, you have your top plane, and you have your front plane. I have a couple of forms now that I have added in, and what I want you to notice is how this form looks like it's above us, and this form looks like it's below us. For this one, we're able to see the bottom plane, so it's like we're looking up at it. But for this one, we're able to see the upper plane. We're looking down at it. Irregular forms, organic forms, like for example, things like that. That is a flat shape, but you can turn it into a form. Follow the lines, the converging lines. I did them freehand, but make sure that they're always touching or converging at the vanishing point. But essentially, what would happen if it has a hole in it? These shapes, the ones that I'm talking about today, are geometric forms. Pyramids, rectangular prisms, cylinders, spheres. This is more of an organic, irregular form. And out in nature, you're going to see things like flowers and rocks with all kinds of irregular planes and structures. I also have videos where I explain how to draw trees, for example. Even then, even when you're drawing organic structures, it's very important to learn to simplify. You're not starting by drawing the leaf itself or with the texture. You're starting with the general structure of it. And then once you've understood that for that form and perspective, then you move on to adding the smaller clusters and then the texture, which would be the leaves. What happens if I had, let's do a rectangle kind of like that, right on the horizon line. Part of it is below the horizon line and part of it is above. You're going to see only two planes in this case. Corner, corner, connect those corners to the vanishing point, give it whatever depth you want. Same thing with this one, align, and then close with a vertical. So this structure is pretty much at our head level on the horizon line. And when we have something like this at our head level, we're not able to see three planes. We're only able to see two planes. We're able to see the front plane and the side plane. You could have the exact same object. And if you have it lower on the ground, way beneath your head level, it's going to look in a certain way. And if you have it floating up in the air above you, it's going to look different. You're going to be able to see different planes of that object. And if it is at your head level right in front of you, you're going to be able to see different things. It doesn't mean that the proportions of the thing itself change. It's just the perspective changes that you're seeing that object from. So let's do one last one before getting into our room drawing. I'm going to do a large square, maybe a bit of a rectangle here. And I'm going to do the same thing. Corner, 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 and let's see what we can see of those planes. So I'm aligning corner with the vanishing point, give it that depth that you want. Corner with the vanishing point, give it that depth. And then last corner with the vanishing point and give it that depth. Close with a horizontal, parallel, 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 and close with a vertical. Parallel, parallel, parallel. Side plane, front plane, upper plane. Just trying to give these a different value, maybe like a lighter value, the lightest value, medium value, darkest value, so that I can see the different planes. What I'm going to do for the room drawing is first, I am going to draw a rectangle for my back wall. What's important when you're drawing a room, especially for this kind of exercise where we're creating this from imagination, and it's an exercise where we do want to have enough space to add furniture and stuff into the walls and the ceiling and the floor. Try to make your rectangle like a medium size, so that you don't have to make it any specific size. You can do whatever size you want, as long as the back wall is not super small and it's not super large. Because if you make it very small, then it's going to look like more of a hallway. Like the back wall is very, very far away from you. Like it's a very long room. The smaller the rectangle, the longer the room you're going to create. And if it's a very huge rectangle, then it's going to look like you're super close to the wall and you're not going to have enough space to add in your furniture that we're going to be adding into the room. So let me just tell you what size my rectangle is going to approximately be. And you can just kind of do something similar to that. You do want to make sure that the, give me a sec. No, I want to make it a little bit taller. You do want to make sure that the horizontal for your rectangle, horizontals are horizontals and the verticals are verticals. Hold on, give me just a second so that I can sort this out, and then I'll measure this out for you and you can kind of see. Now remember, I am working in a 9 by 12 inch sketchbook. Do have that in mind. I wouldn't recommend doing this exercise, at least not this beginner exercise, in a very small sketchbook. Again, you're not going to have enough space to practice. I think that's a good size. Let me draw this a little bit darker for you. So let me measure this out and tell you exactly what size this rectangle is. I didn't measure it out. I just used a ruler and supported myself to make sure that my lines were straight, but I didn't measure things out necessarily. Depending on the proportions of your sketchbook, more or less leave something similar in terms of space, above, below, and to the sides. But my rectangle is almost 4.5 inches in height and 6 inches in width. 6 by 4.5 inches. I'm going to erase these extra little sections of my initial lines that I created, but make sure that your lines are straight. And if that means that you have to measure down from the edges of your page to create a couple of tick marks for yourself on either side and then create your line, do whatever you have to do, but create a rectangle that is approximately this size in relation to your page, whatever size of page it is that you're working in. You want some space above, below, and to the sides. This is the back wall. We're standing right in front of the back wall, right in the center of the back wall. We have it right in front of us. Even in indoor scenes, it's very important that we establish where the horizon line is, because that is going to help us visualize things better and place everything effectively or draw everything effectively. Once you have your rectangle, what you're going to do, place your ruler align your ruler right on the corner, from one corner to the other corner, align it right there. And you're going to create a little mark right in the center there and a couple of lines going down. Okay, so I had a little mark and I created my 2 lines. Let me draw these a little bit darker for you. Please know that the more lines you have on your paper and the darker they are, the more difficult and more confusing it's going to be to draw the furniture. I would recommend keeping these lines that we're going to be adding in just a bit lighter, as light as you can, as long as you can see them. The more lines you have, the messier things will get and the more confusing things will be when you're actually drawing things. Okay, so you just want this as like a light grid so that you have that guide to draw everything else. Okay, so you have your little mark and you have pulled 2 diagonals coming out from the corners of this rectangle. I'm going to do the exact same thing, but the other way across. I'm going to create my little mark right here in the center and my 2 lines going off in either direction. And I'm just going to complete these lines because my ruler didn't reach those last 2 sections. So I'm just going to extend these out so that they reach the edges of my page. Just like what I said with the first exercise, if your vanishing point is not right in the center of your drawing space, that is perfectly fine. What matters most is that you're using your converging lines to draw all of the elements that we're going to be adding next, and make sure that the converging lines meet at your vanishing point, wherever that vanishing point is. It doesn't matter if this is slightly smaller than this side or this is slightly smaller than this. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so if anyone guessed that the vanishing point would be right here, you would be correct, because remember that the converging lines always meet and converge at the vanishing point. As I said with the first exercise, the vanishing point is always on the horizon line, and the horizon line is our eye level. So what does this tell us? That the horizon line, our eye level, is right here. Having done that first exercise, everything above this is above us, above our head level, and everything below this is below our head level. What I'm going to do is the exact same thing that I did for the first exercise, but I'm not going to be placing converging lines in the back wall. See how I'm adding these converging lines only on the walls for this drawing? Because I don't need them here. As you're adding in these converging lines, again, make sure that you're aligning your ruler with the vanishing point. Don't rush this process, because these lines are going to be your guide when you're drawing the furniture. So this is just an approximate number of lines. You can add fewer, you can add more. The more lines you add, the messier things tend to get, of course. So don't feel that you need to fill up all of the space with a gazillion lines, because you really don't. We're going to be adding extra lines, I'm sure, as we're adding in our different furniture pieces. I can count my lines so that you can have an approximate number that you can go by. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have around 8, not counting the horizon line over here, and approximately the same amount over here. I'm going to do the same thing for the ceiling and the floor. Keep aligning your ruler with the vanishing point. Don't get sloppy, because that's when we start making mistakes and then the perspective is all off. But rest assured that the more you do this kind of exercise, the better you get at visualizing things so that you're then able to do all of this freehand and you're still going to be able to communicate believable perspective. Once we're done with these lines, we're going to be all set to start with our furniture. And I'm starting to think of what I want this room to be. Do I want it to be like a little TV room or a bedroom or maybe like a room with a table in it? It can be whatever we want it to be. And I want to encourage you to try another drawing out for yourself. What's going to make you really have this knowledge, make this knowledge deep knowledge that stays with you forever, is applying this knowledge and these steps to multiple kinds of scenes, even multiple kinds of rooms. The more kind of different things that you practice with, the more solid this knowledge is going to become. We're going to visualize the bulk of a bed as a long rectangular prism. I want you to forget about like the design of the headboard and like all of these things. Kind of simplify the bulk of the bed as a long rectangular prism that is coming forward toward us. Same as with the first exercise, what I want you to do is simply create a rectangle. My bed is going to be against this wall on this section of the floor and right up against like this corner of the room. So I'm going to start my rectangular prism right here with a simple flat rectangle, which is going to be the back plane of the rectangular prism that is up against the wall. And now this rectangular prism is going to be coming forward, and we know that we need to use the converging lines. The bed is going to be coming forward. I'm going to use this corner, and this corner. I'm going to align my ruler with those points. I'm going to bring this line out, and bring this line out. I'm going to make these a little bit darker. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the verticals to close the planes. Remember how we use verticals and horizontals to close the planes? And I can erase this long line that I don't need. Let me make these lines a little bit lighter. This would essentially be a huge rectangular prism there that is kind of going off the page. All I did was I started with a flat shape at the back, the same way that we did with the first exercise. Then I connected my corners of this flat shape to the vanishing point right here. I created my lines to close my planes of the shape, and I just created this front plane of the rectangular prism. It's a huge bed. I'm going to be cutting into this rectangle now. Now I know what perspective I'm seeing the bed at, and I am visualizing it as a solid form. So now I can do whatever I want with this. So we have the front plane, upper plane, side plane. And it doesn't have to be this long. I mean, if you made your bed a little bit shorter than mine and your vertical is here, for example, and your horizontal is here, that's perfectly fine as well. It's still a solid form. You know, if I made it slightly shorter, it would look like this. What's important is that you're using your converging lines and that the perspective is made sense of. So you're able to see the top plane, the side plane, the front plane. Vertical, I think this is a little bit crooked. The next step requires some visualization skills. So you want to make sure that everything right now looks good, looks believable, looks 3D. I'm gonna make these lines a little bit more right now they're too dark. They're not going to allow me to give structure to this bed if they're too dark. But okay, so let me move on to turning this into a bed. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to start cutting into this rectangular prism. So imagine that you're like a sculpture and this is your block of marble and you're turning this block of marble into a bed. So you're cutting into it. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make it shorter because this is too tall. So what I'm going to do essentially is this top edge is going to be the top point of the headrest. I'll turn it into the headrest in just a bit. But first I want to give this like where approximately would the mattress start within this. It's definitely not that tall. I'm going to make it shorter. So the mattress is going to start right there. This section right here is the mattress. And then I can just do another horizontal like that. And that is going to be the mattress right there. See how I used a converging line to create that top edge of the mattress? Always using those vanishing points. Once you have what's mattress and what's extra height, you can erase this line and this line over here. You no longer need them. And you can turn this into a headrest. Give it whatever design you'd like to give it. I'm just going to do that kind of thing. This plane nearest us, what would that look like? You can just do whatever design you'd like. Keep it square if you want. Doesn't really matter. But you can see how, because I've been guiding myself with the converging lines and the grid, I managed to make the back end of my bed, which is farthest away from us, smaller, and this part of the bed, which is closest to us, larger. I need to complete this line right there. I think I'm going to bring this down a little. I think usually these parts of beds are a little bit lower, so I'm just going to bring this down. Sometimes it's just mattress down here, in which case it would be another horizontal down here, and we wouldn't see the corner of it. So it would be something like that. If you don't have anything at all at the edge of the bed down here nearest us, it would look like this. You can do whatever you'd like. Use your imagination. But what's important is that the structure is there and that you're using the converging lines when you need to. This right here is the front plane. This right here is the side plane that is receding away from us. And this is the top plane. And all of these lines here, the diagonals, are converging at the vanishing point. If something looks off or wonky, it's probably because your converging lines are not aligning right, or your horizontals are not parallel where they need to be parallel, or your verticals are not parallel where they need to be parallel. And another thing that could be looking off is maybe the proportions of your bed are not super realistic. Maybe your bed is too small, or maybe your bed is too large. In my case, I feel that my bed is a little bit too long. The only thing that I need to do to shorten the bed is simply bring this here and create another horizontal here, and that would shorten the bed. See, check it out. It's very easy to fix those kinds of mistakes as long as you're still paying attention to what really matters. The converging lines, all that kind of stuff. I think that looks a little bit better. I just shortened the bed a little bit. Let me do this hatching again. Let me know if you guys have any questions. If you wanted to add in like a little pillow, for example, maybe a little blanket situation. What would the pillow look like from this perspective? I'm going to be adding a window over here above the bed. So how do we add a window? Well, we start with a flat shape following the converging lines. So where do you want your window? I am not going to be placing my window up against the corner, because usually in the houses and buildings I've seen, there is a space of wall always between windows and the corner of the room. So I'm just going to create a vertical wherever I see fit. So when you're drawing rooms and buildings, you kind of need to bring in your understanding of buildings that you've seen and proportions of things and whatnot, because otherwise things may look too large or too long or too small. Beds are not usually up super tall. They're usually lower to the ground. And how tall is the usual headrest? I'm using my converging lines to draw flat shape for the window. So I'm just going to make my window right here above the bed, vertical, vertical on either side, and then use the converging lines for your top and bottom edges. And I'm going to show you how to add more realism to the window, how to create that sense of depth in the wall. If I just do this, yes, it looks like a window, but it doesn't look super realistic. because it looks like a flat shape, like a poster that has been pasted or stuck to the wall. There is no depth. Usually, when you see windows, you're able to see a little bit of the thickness of the wall. It makes things look more realistic because it provides that sense of volume and 3D-ness to the wall. So I'm going to show you how to do that. First, you just start with your simple flat shape, following the converging lines and creating two verticals on either side to close that shape. Then you can decide if you want to add in this detail, this cross, or if you want to leave it out. You don't have to. That's just like a window design type thing. You can create your window however you want. But what I want to show you is this thing that I started doing right here. So how can you give thickness to the wall? From this vantage point that we're observing this particular element from, this inner plane of the wall is something that we would be able to see. So how do you add it in? Well, the way that I like doing this is I first create my vertical wherever I want, wherever I feel like it looks good in terms of that thickness of the wall. I don't want to make it super thick, right? But I don't want to make it super narrow either. Just give it like a believable thickness. From here, you're just going to do two horizontals and you're going to use your ruler, align it with the vanishing point, align it to the corner of that shape that I just created, and close that. Now I have this bottom section showing as well, a little bit down here. This is the thickness of the wall. This is the thickness of the wall. And this is the thickness of the wall up here. So I'm able to see more of this inner upper plane here than this plane right here, the lower inner plane. And the reason this is because this plane is way higher above our eye level than this plane right here, which is near our eye level. So we're able to see more of this one than of this one. If the window had ended right here at this height at our eye level, then we wouldn't be able to see any of this plane at all because it's at our eye level, but it's a little bit lower. So we are able to see a bit of it. And now little clouds in the sky. What happens if I wanted to add something to the back wall? Anything that is flat that you want to add to the back wall, or even if things have a little, like let's just say that there is one of those large screen TVs, which wouldn't make sense for the TV to be on the back wall if the bed is facing the other way. But let's just say that you wanted one of those like large TV screens that is up against the wall. You would just see something kind of like this, and maybe just a teeny tiny bit of the back sections receding away from you, depending on where it is in relation to the horizon line. So you would see something like this, where all you're able to see of that thickness is this little teeny tiny section here, right? So all I did was align this corner and this corner to the vanishing point to create that big bit of thickness for the TV screen. If what is on the wall is flat like a poster, then you don't have to create any side planes at all. If you're just wanting to add a poster or a flat like art print on the wall or something like that, because it doesn't have any like, even paper has a thickness to it if you want to be super technical about it. But if it's a very flat object that doesn't have any obvious thickness to it, then you can just do this like a poster or a painting, an art print hanging up on the wall. You don't have to give it thickness. But if it does have thickness, then consider using the vanishing point. Now, let's just say that I want to add a little rug on the floor. I need to use the converging lines. So let's just say that I want a little rug. Same as with the art print, rugs are very thin. So I wouldn't worry about giving it another plane because they're very flat objects. So really all I have to do is create that shape, but I want to make sure that I'm following the converging lines. And I can do this kind of thing. Maybe it's that kind of rug that has little things kind of going like that. But even when you're doing those little details, make sure that you're taking into account the converging lines. One more important example here of like a solid piece of furniture, I really want to explain this with a tall piece of furniture that has like a part of it is below our eye level and a part of it is above our eye level. So let's do a bookshelf right up against this wall over here. How would I do a bookshelf? We start with a rectangular prism. How large would that rectangular prism be? I'm just going to use my intuition, what I know to be true about room proportions and shelf proportions. And I know that this is my eye level. And I know that shelves are usually taller than me. It should end somewhere around maybe here or so, maybe a little bit taller. If you need to add in an extra line, do it. Just add in an extra line. If you feel that the lines that you already have there are not suitable for what you're trying to add in, just add another one. Okay? I think that this one will do. So I think that this will be the height of my shelf. What I'm going to do once again is I'm going to start with the back shape or the back plane of this rectangular prism that is right up against the wall. Just like what I did with the bed, where I started with that back shape that is up against the back wall. So now that I have the height that I want to give it, I have to give it its width. What's the approximate width of like shelves that I've seen in my life? Okay, so maybe something like that. And I'm gonna make it fit in my drawing space. So long verticals and horizontals are straight. So I'm just doing the best that I can. You can always use a ruler. If drawing these longer lines is hard for you and you are afraid of making them too crooked, help yourself with a ruler and draw that long straight line. If you place your shape on the shape of the wall, it's going to look like the furniture is right up against the wall. When it comes to beds and bookshelves and that kind of thing, it makes sense that the piece of furniture is oftentimes up against the wall. But when it comes to tables and things like that, it's away from the walls. Okay. But if you want something to look like it's up against the wall, like there is no space between the piece of furniture and the wall, then you have to make sure that you're placing the initial shape on the wall, right? Let me lighten these lines a little bit because I don't want to get confused myself and I want to make this as clear as possible. I'm just going to add in the lines that I actually need along the way. So it's now time to turn this flat shape into a three-dimensional structure, a rectangular prism. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the front plane. I could start with the back plane. I'm going to start with the front plane. Remember those flat shapes that we start with that require the horizontals and the verticals? Remember how with the first exercise, we started with a flat rectangle or square? That's what I'm doing right now. The front plane that is nearest us is what I'm doing right now. And yes, I'm thinking about general thickness and proportions of a bookshelf. So this is the closest plane nearest us for that bookshelf structure. Okay, so I just did a long flat rectangle with verticals and horizontals. Those parallel horizontals, parallel verticals. I now have that front plane of this rectangular prism right here. Now that I have the height and I have the thickness and the depth that I want to give this bookshelf, like all of the information is already here for me. I just need to complete this by using the converging lines. Right now, I just kind of have like a flat looking folded paper or something like that. I need to give it the other planes to actually give it the structure that I need. I'm going to take my ruler. Remember the little circles that I'm making on the corners nearest the vanishing point? I'm going to take my ruler, align it with the vanishing point, align it with the corner of my shape, and pull that line out. Same thing down here. Align with the vanishing point, align with the corner of my shape, and pull that line out. Let me make my other lines lighter so that you can see these. So remember, this is just the flat shape. All of this is the shape that we started with in the first exercise. This is the front plane that we drew, like a flat shape that we started with. And then from there, I just took the two corners, aligned those corners with the vanishing point, and that's how I got this and this. Let me erase this rug section here. I'm going to close this with a vertical. Actually, I need to give it a little bit more depth. I'm going to close this with a vertical. This right here is a horizontal. This right here is a horizontal. I need to fix this. I'm going to align this better and fix that bottom section so that things meet where they should here, in this corner. So this is a like a hollow box of sorts right now where we can see into the box. This section of this line right here, we wouldn't be able to see, nor would we be able to see this bottom section of this line. We would just see this, but it's kind of a hollow box. So I'm missing the shelves. Whether you start with the front plane or the back plane, it doesn't really matter. You need to make sure that you're aware of the height that you're giving the object. If you need to have it a specific height, which when it comes to drawing rooms and stuff like that, it is important because if proportions look off, then the drawing is not going to look believable. If the bed is floating in the air, if it's too long, if the bookshelf is super tiny, stuff like that, then it's not going to look realistic. You don't need to start necessarily with the front plane. Sometimes it makes sense to start with the back plane. When it comes to the bed, I started with the back plane. It doesn't really matter what plane you start with. You start with one of the flat shapes, whether it's the front one or the back one, and then you use that flat shape to help you create the opposite plane using those converging lines. You don't have to follow very specific steps like do this and then do this and then do this and then add a line and then it's a case by case scenario. And as long as you're applying the main things, which are using your converging lines and making sure that you're acknowledging the where the vanishing point is and all these things, you can choose whether to start with the back plane, the front plane, and what specific things you need to look at to give that specific object that believable sense of 3D-ness. I think a lot of times beginners want how do you do this step by step? And yes, while it is important in the beginning to be provided like those specific steps so that you can go through the process mindfully, what you ultimately need to know is that every drawing is different and you're going to have to pull from your knowledge and your tools that you have collected along your learning journey in order to solve that specific problem. So how do I add shelves into this hollow box? I just use converging lines. If you are able to do this, then everything else is easy. I actually can see some of my lines here still, so I could just go over them to kind of see how many shelves I want. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shelves for me. So all I did was use my converging lines. And again, if you need to add in extra lines by aligning your ruler to the vanishing point, go ahead and do that. Or if you have enough lines there that you can see, you can just trace over them, make them a little bit darker. It is important that your shelf reaches kind of maybe the middle point of this plane right here, because shelves in bookshelves come forward, right? So your line cannot end right here on the vertical. It has to come past that vertical and into this shape, this inner plane, so that you can give it its depth. This is what's cool about something like this, where this piece of furniture is taller than you, but a lot of it is below your eye level as well. What's cool is that you can see how these shelves slowly change in direction. When the shelf is at your eye level, approximately, it's straight and horizontal. The shelves that go above your eye level slowly get more and more diagonal. The shelves that go below your eye level slowly go more and more diagonal towards the opposite direction. But when the shelf is at your eye level, it's most horizontal. Now, how would you actually make these look like shelves? Because right now they just look like lines. So the way that you do this is, again, you use converging lines coming from the vanishing point. So start wherever you want. But for example, here, I think I made this a little bit too tall. In all of these, all you need is a horizontal. Okay, so you give it a horizontal first. I think that's going to be easier. Give it the horizontal there. And in these, because they are at your eye level, you wouldn't really see the upper plane, you would see the lower plane. right? So, whoop. But in these, you need a horizontal, then a converging line. Horizontal, converging line, horizontal, converging line. Let me fix these, make these a little bit better. Converging line, horizontal. And here is where we wouldn't really see much. This is the inner plane of the box, upper inner plane of the box, and lower inner plane of the box. I'm just gonna complete this rug. So those are the most challenging things that we're gonna be adding into the drawing. All I'm gonna do is add in a couple of light fixtures on the ceiling and a little door over here. So for the light fixtures on the door are pretty easy because I'm going to be adding, you can really add whatever you want. Like if you want to add a type of light fixture that is kind of like that, where there's a little half sphere coming down, then you don't really need to follow the converging lines. But if you wanted to add in the long type of more, I guess, more like office light fixtures where it's actually embedded into the ceiling, there would be no volume coming out of that kind of light fixture. So it's just drawing the flat shapes on the ceiling. So here's what I mean. You can make them in whatever direction you want, really. Let's just say that I want to add in a couple of, let me add these in with my darker pencil. And I'm going to try to make these similar on either side, at least relatively similar in size and width. But I want to make sure that my lines are converging at the vanishing point. So 1 and 2. These are the kind of light fixtures that are like embedded in the ceiling. It would be kind of like that. But you can also do them like this, like long rectangles, or what would be long rectangles, or you can do them like this. Finally, I'm going to be adding a door, and I want my door right here. So I want my door to be slightly less tall, shorter than the bookshelf. Why not use this line that I already have? Just like with windows, doors are not usually up against the corner of the room. There is a little section of wall, a little narrow wall section usually before the door starts. Just take that distance from the corner of the room, whatever you feel is appropriate, and then bring down that long vertical from there. And the bookshelf is kind of covering up part of the door for me. So if you have extra space between your bookshelf and the door, maybe you can even add a little, well, I can add the handle over here on the opposite side so that you can see that it's a door. Or maybe it ends up looking like a closet door, maybe like one of those sliding doors, you know what I mean? It doesn't really matter. Whatever kind of door it is, just like with the fixtures and the window, these types of things are embedded into the wall. I don't have to worry about giving it the planes and all this. Over here with the window I did, because this is a hole that we see through. So we are able to see the inner planes of the windows because it's a hole through the wall. But when it comes to doors and this kind of light fixture where it's just embedded in, you don't really see those plane changes. So you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. This is my drawing complete. I'm just going to add a little bit of contrast into some of my line work with my softer pencil grade. And I'm going to call this study done. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that, you guys. Take good care, you guys, and thank you so much for joining. Talk to you soon.